Okay, let me see if I can offer a little more help in trying to understand and put together this information that we're getting here about moral standing. And I think that a good way to look at this is to use this diagram that I've took from an author named Denny Elliott in a book called Ethical Challenges. The terminology is just a little different here, but I don't think it's going to cause too much of a problem. Um, if you look at what we got here, so what we got is some concentric circles. We don't really have anything discussed outside of the circle, and the circles are meant to divide out beings, okay? So in the very center of the circle, we have rational, competent, moral agents. So these would be fully competent human adults capable of reasoning and self-consciousness and acting morally. Then we get out to the next ring, and we have something called non-rational people, non-competent people, and children. Now, pretty obvious what children are. Non-competent people would be people who are unable to make their own decisions. I guess non-rational people would be people who are severely disabled, might be people who are comatose because they can't act rationally. I think that is probably meant here by Elliott too. And we have a much darker circle, and this circle is described as the circle of the moral community. So in this circle, we have what our text describes as beings with full moral standing. Okay, oops, sorry about that. Beings with full moral standing. Notice that there's two kinds in there. So we tend, this is like, I would call this the common view. We tend to think that all these things, non-rational people, children, even though they aren't competent moral agents, we still think that they're full moral standing. This is our belief. Okay? And then we move outside to the next circle, the next ring, and we have things put in there like the environment, animals, human corpses, fetuses, probably, I think they mean human fetuses here. And this is the circle of partial moral standing. Okay, she calls this circle subjects of moral worth, but it's slightly different terminology, but it means the same thing. And I hope this diagram kind of helps to put what Deitch and Goodry-Gimes are talking about here, about the difference between full and partial moral standing. Just a couple of the points that they make about this. Again, we had said this before. We believe that humans have moral standing, but other animals may as well. And we put them in the moral community there. All humans are there, even humans with fundamentally different capacities. They pose, as they say in the text, difficult questions. And that has to do with how much we owe them morally, but still they're there. That's the moral community. But that doesn't mean that we don't believe that other things we have duties towards, like plants, inanimate objects, even culture was put in there. So we got kinds of duties and kinds of moral standing. So full moral standing, partial moral standing, none at all. So that might be something like maybe a rock might be outside of there, okay, because rocks don't have any kind of moral standing. Indirect is a kind of important distinction, that the reason you might have a duty towards something might be because it belongs to something else. So it might be indirect, like it may be the case that it's wrong to destroy somebody's property, not because destroying their property does harm to the property. Okay, so this is what we mean by intrinsic harm, but it harms the person because the person owns it. Not all principles are going to apply to things with partial moral standing. So the example that they give in the text is autonomy of trees. Trees don't have autonomy. And in the cases of the moral community, the full and equal moral standing are duties we owe to all equally. Okay, hopefully that helps. And that brings us up to this passage where Veach and Gudrigheim say one of the critical questions in bioethics is who has full moral standing. When we divide living beings into those with full moral standing and those with some lesser standing, and I think the idea is that we've already done this, there is a burden of justification when the time comes to draw the dividing line. It is that problem that is addressed in this chapter. Okay, so we already do it. The assumption is we've made this distinction, but how did we do it? And how do we justify it, particularly if we want to put things sort of outside the pale, so to speak? Go back to this diagram. Okay, if we want to put something in here and say it doesn't have full moral status, well, on the basis of what do we do that? Now, this is an interesting question. This is a difficult question. So what happens here is if we try to find some common feature, and this is two groups, maybe a group of adults, what we call competent moral agents versus children. What do they hold in common that give them both full moral standing? And what ethicists have found is that you can either, when we try to do this, we either hit criteria that are too narrow or too broad. And no one's ever been able to come up with the criteria that's going to account for that dark line that we were looking at. So, for example, if you choose something like rationality or self-awareness, this is kind of a narrow critical criteria because it rules out children, non-rational people, and non-competent people that we already think have full moral status. So that criteria doesn't seem to work. But if we start to broaden out a bit, maybe we'll pick something like feeling pain or being sentient or being alive, the criteria gets too broad because then we start including other things like animals, insects, and trees that we don't think have full moral standing, but they would have to have it if we draw that line that way. So again, we're back to this question. When we divide living beings, the burden of justification is how we've drawn the line. How can we draw the line then? Okay, so what I want you to do is, in thinking about this, I want you to try this out for yourself. So there is a questionnaire. It's underneath the lesson, but there's a link below here that I would like you to, at this point, open. And it's a questionnaire, and I'd like you to give it a shot, see what answers you have.